Nicole here with Job Hunt Solutions, and today is Thursday, which means it's viewer question and answer day. Today's question was about how to prepare for telephone interviews. Telephone interviews have become more and more commonplace as recruiters and hiring managers look to the telephone interview to help streamline their shortlist process and to really decide which candidates they're going to bring in for face-to-face interviews. Preparing for the telephone interview is going to be slightly different only because you've got the advantage because the interviewer can't see you. So here are my top 5 tips for preparing for your telephone interview. Tip number 1, make sure that you remove any and all distractions. Now typically a telephone interview will be pre-scheduled, but every once in a while a recruiter or hiring manager will just call you out of the blue. It's okay in the event that somebody calls you out of the blue for you to ask to reschedule to a time that's mutually convenient. You really don't want to be caught if you're carrying a crying baby or driving in your car, have all kinds of distractions where you're not really able to put your best foot forward in the telephone interview. So if you do have a time scheduled for your telephone interview, just make sure that you schedule it for a time when you don't have any distractions. The telephone interview is just as important as the face-to-face interview in making sure that you continue on the process for the hiring decisions. Tip number 2, have a dedicated workspace for having your telephone interview. So ideally this would be at a desk or a table, someplace where you can be seated comfortably, but not so comfortably that you sound overly relaxed in your telephone interview. Tip number 3, smiling. I know it may sound silly to be smiling over the telephone, but it really does shine through in your voice. A best practice that many recruiters and telephone salespeople use is to have a mirror at their desk while they're on the telephone. Not only will this help to remind you to smile while you're speaking with the person, but also it can help you with your enunciation and pronunciation of certain words. Especially if you have the tendency, like me, to sometimes mumble. It really can be distracting over the telephone and cause the recruiter or hiring manager to either mishear you or misunderstand you entirely. Tip number 4, even though the telephone interview tends to be a bit more of a relaxed situation, it's still important to be professional in your word choices. So be mindful of using slang words while you're speaking with the person or coming across as being far too casual. This is still a business meeting, even though it may be a bit more casual in the approach. That said, it's still very important to make sure that your personality can somehow come through the telephone. And again, back to tip number 3, smiling usually helps make that happen. Tip number 5, be organized. This really comes down to being diligent with documenting your job search. So keeping records of the roles to which you've applied really does help. Doing some company research, bookmarking certain web pages of the company website will help, or any news articles about the company. Keeping certain notes about that at the ready, so you are prepared if the interviewer asks you any questions specifically about the company and why you're interested in working with the company. In addition, you can have thought out and written out your answers to some of the common interview questions. My advice with this, however, would be to have these notes in bullet form. This way, it doesn't sound like you're reading a script. Rather, it comes across a lot more naturally while keeping you on top of all of the points that you want to make sure that you hit in the interview. Finally, keeping your notes, you can also come up with some really great questions about the company and about the role. So if you've already had some pre-planned questions and some of them aren't answered in the actual telephone interview, you have those notes at the ready, again, to be able to refer back to in the telephone interview. Thank you so much for such a great question, and I hope you found this helpful. If you have your own hints and tips on passing the telephone interview, please do leave a comment below. You can also send me a private message on LinkedIn, via email, on Twitter, Facebook, whatever works best for you. If you like this video, make sure that you hit like and share with your friends. And to keep up to date with my videos as they're released, just hit subscribe and you'll be the first to know when my videos are released. And of course, if you need any help preparing for your interviews, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, happy hunting! Where you don't have any distractions. Make sure you schedule it